Hello and welcome. I'm Yamini and I'm joined by Paul Vorbach today, founder and managing director of AcademyGlobal. Today, we're talking about probity in public sector procurement, and it's a word everyone in the sector knows, but one that's often misunderstood. We'll look at what it means and why some really expensive failures keep happening, and how organizations can build it as a genuine skill rather than just a box to tick. So, Paul, let's start from the beginning. If you ask most procurement professionals what probity means, what do they tell you, and where does that understanding fall short?
Yeah, so most people, not all, but most people across public sector tend to associate probity more narrowly than what is really intended. So some people limit the definition of probity and its application to what you and I might think of in terms of being compliance. So I follow the rules, I follow the policy, I follow the procedure, I don't break the rules, I don't break the law. And therefore, if I don't do any of those things, then I'm following probity. But actually, probity is much broader than that. And it's interesting if we trace the word really back to its origins. It goes right back to Roman days. And it first entered the English language in around 1600. And the Latin origins of probity extends to being upright, more than being just honest, to have good character. And within the spirit of the earliest definitions of probity, and it's the words from which it derived from, is this ability to make judgment to do the right thing, to go above and beyond just what the narrowly correct legal action is. So often when I'm speaking to people through our training programs, I'm asking them to zoom out a bit further than just compliance, than just following the rules, and bring judgment into place. So things like fairness, integrity, which are words that sometimes can be a bit fuzzy around the edges, but they're really important when we think about probity. It's about going above and beyond just narrow legal policy compliance.
Right. So, to my second question. So, if knowing the rules isn't the problem, what does treating probity as a real active capability actually look like from day to day? And have the rules themselves caught up?
Yeah, so it is difficult to put rules around probity because probity is a principle. And as a principle, it's more of a guiding light than a prescriptive follow the bouncing ball or tick a box approach. And I think that's part of the challenge, actually. Um, to me, probity also is a cultural question. It's having people who work together in the same organization or the same department or division of an organization act in a way whereby they are all confident that they're doing the right thing, that they've calibrated their actions beyond just compliance, and they have a sense of confidence that they're doing the right thing in the interests of the public, and they are able to make decisions confidently, sometimes more time efficiently. They check in with each other. If there's any sense of grey around what we should do or not do in a particular situation, nobody's hiding, trying to prevent an uncomfortable conversation. If I'm not sure about whether something is a conflict of interest, I put it on the table, I talk to a colleague, I talk to my manager, and I'm not doing that out of fear. I'm doing that out of being upright and really looking to do the right thing in an environment where I acknowledge that sometimes it's not really, really black and white.
Right. So it's really the difference between knowing the rule to declare a conflict and actually recognizing when one's staring at you. So coming to my next question, actually, what does an organization gain when probity is done well? And when should they bring in outside advisors rather than just building judgment themselves?
So what are the benefits? Well, I guess the benefits can be looked at narrowly in terms of economic benefits. So if a procurement activity, for example, has been undertaken and subsequently has been determined not to have adhered to probity principles, the whole contract may be voided, or if it's within still the procurement process, that procurement process may be ceased and have to recommence. So in some cases, we'll see there's a direct and measurable cost associated with time, effort, staff. But I'd probably argue that the more important and probably the larger really is around public confidence and trust. Now, this can be a bit more difficult to measure, but we tend to see it in systems where trust is low, and we tend to see it in environments where people's behavior changes because the assumption is that we don't live or work in an environment where probity matters. And those environments are often seen as being quite corrupt. Bribery of public officials exists. And at the extreme, people just give up and they just go, well, this is just the way it is. And those environments are not usually the ones that most people want to live and work in. They're not usually the healthiest societies. They're never the most economically sound societies. They're often not the safest societies. They're not the ones that have the best gender equality outcomes and economic and health outcomes, because public sector environments like health, education, the court systems are deprived from their ability to function well when we have high grades of corruption and fraud involved. So that's a fairly extreme position to contrast, but I think along the continuum we can see how that can actually happen. So there's this notion of a trust dividend or probity dividend, that we can partially develop economic metrics in relation to the measurement of that.
When should they bring in outside advisors rather than building that judgment themselves?
So this is a complicated question. A very conservative view might initially be, we're not sure, this could be an area which is a bit grey, let's simply appoint a probity advisor. There's two problems potentially with that default. The first is simply because it requires judgment shouldn't mean that we need to outsource that. We should be confident enough as a public sector department or agency to back our own judgments, have robust internal discussions, to have clear policy to guide us. And the second part of the problem is that there's an economic cost every time we outsource to probity advisors or consultants. So we're incurring additional cost, and we potentially are seeking to outsource decisions that speak directly to what the public expects us to be accountable for. And I think the very process of outsourcing an activity is almost a confession to say, look, we don't really know what's going on here. So it reveals as an action a lack of competency. And there are circumstances where probity advisors should be used, but I think they're probably rarer and they should be less frequent than what they tend to be for some agencies and departments. This is a very active discussion across Australian public sector, across the Commonwealth states and local government as well. I think the point is, if it's particularly high risk, if the organisation needs to be able to defend publicly that a third party's been brought in, maybe the argument for probity advisors can be made, but there is a cost, and the question as to who's accountable needs to be considered really carefully every time we make these sorts of decisions. So I think there's pros and cons. I'm not sure if the balance is right at the moment. I think a number of departments and agencies are still too dependent, too cautious, not really courageous enough to own the probity decisions fully.
Right. So coming to my next question, actually, for agencies wanting to build that judgment rather than to outsource it, where should they start?
It would be easy as somebody who works in a capability organization to glibly suggest that training is the answer to all of these problems, but that would be disingenuous. I think the starting point is internal conversations with leaders, with managers and staff around, do we understand what probity is? Do we understand it, its importance, how it's broader from simply being compliance and ticking a box? Do we understand what the public's expectation is for us, what the probity dividend or benefits of this might be, how it can achieve better outcomes for the people that we serve? So I guess a starting point, a deliberate conversation, a starting point of saying, do we agree on what this thing means? How well do we think that we're doing it? And if there are gaps, where do we think those gaps might be? Might it be in procurement? Might it be in conflict of interest disclosures? Might it be gaps in relation to even how we work with each other within the organisation? And I think it's at that point where the problem is at least partially understood that capability interventions can make a difference. And that's when an organisation like AcademyGlobal or a similar organisation that has a depth of experience in this space can often bring in some additional scenarios, examples, create an environment where people don't feel threatened or intimidated, and have a really constructive journey through what are the sorts of things that need to be done to build confidence, to build trust, and to make it really part of the DNA of the organisation.
That's actually a really useful shift in how to think about probity from a checklist to a genuine capability. So, Paul, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for watching.